Well, that is quite the shock, much to my surprise, and pretty much the entire media's, and I think probably people all around South America and perhaps even in Argentina. The presidential primaries in Argentina have voted in favor of a politician who is sympathetic to Bitcoin or open to Bitcoin. So that is quite the surprise to me. So I guess I'm just filming my reaction here. How big of a deal do I think this will be? What do I think this will be Bitcoin price? I mean, these are my thoughts here. So in case you have not heard the news or in case you've not seen the news, this is what we're referring to here. But yesterday, August 13th of 2023, we had this big news here of this primary. And again, this is not the official election. That's in October. This is just the primary. Same thing in how primaries work in most countries. But yeah, so it's a major surprise to have Javier elected here in these primaries. And so the reason this is a big deal, obviously, is because the probability of having a pro-Bitcoin president of a G20 nation um, be in power has dramatically increased just since literally yesterday. Um, Pretty big deal. Yeah, I'm speechless. I don't really know what to say. This is something I did not expect for years. Frankly, this is the guy here. Probably many of my viewers in Europe, Canada, and the US here may not know of him or that he existed until today, but that's who he is. And this is Bitcoin. And in Argentina, this is the price of Bitcoin. So clearly, they're not sharing the same slope in Bitcoin's price in their political currency. See here at the US, Bitcoin's below its all-time high, and US dollars, our political currency, because we have artificially forced our political currency to become stronger. Federal Reserve and the European Bank, the ECB, are in a bit of a conflict here between interest rates and figuring out who can have tighter monetary policy. But Argentina's had the weaker currency, so Bitcoin is rising very quickly in terms of Argentina's PCU instead of ours. And so I think we have to temper expectations first. Obviously, it's just a primary. Obviously, he could not win the general election in October. And obviously, even if he does win, that doesn't mean necessarily he's going to do anything positive for Bitcoin. You know, perhaps he just says it's people's right to use, and he just doesn't get in the way of people using it. Perhaps he does try to enact Bitcoin laws. Perhaps he, there's no telling of what he could do. It's literally just speculation on what he is going to promise, and then it's speculation on if he's going to fulfill those promises, and then it's complete speculation on if those promises will actually be upheld. So obviously, even if he were elected, this is not going to mean Argentina becomes the new El Salvador, where Bitcoin becomes legal tender immediately. Obviously, that's not the most probable path forward. That's probably the minority probability path forward, at least for a significant amount of time. However, the reason I think it's a big deal is because this shifts the Overton window towards Bitcoin. See, in 2017, when I first heard of Bitcoin, I didn't understand it. In 2019, when I started taking it seriously, I thought, okay, perhaps in the far future, maybe in 20, 30 years, this could get big enough that countries use it. They take hold of it, they put it on their treasuries and everything of that sort. And I was shocked in 2020 when Michael Saylor of MicroStrategy adopted Bitcoin Standard. That was much faster than I thought anyone in Wall Street or the corporate sector would adopt it. And then I was just as shocked in 2021 when El Salvador made the announcement that they were going to have Bitcoin as their legal tender. They made adoption there. And of course, obviously, El Salvador is not this magical Bitcoin utopia where we have 90% adoption. Obviously, Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador is still extremely low. Even when it's 5 to 10 times higher than it is here in, say, the US where I am, still it's very low. And so we have to, on a linear scale, temper those expectations that it's going to take a very long time. But when you look at things from a logarithmic perspective, when you look at things from an exponential perspective, you can see in El Salvador, from my anecdotal experience with talking to people, I was just meeting in person with some people from El Salvador this weekend. I'll be going down there in a couple of months probably. So from my anecdotal experience and from all the data, it's just what's occurring there. And so to jump from El Salvador, a country that most people never even heard of, to a G20 nation, now electing someone, because that's a significant thing. We have the population electing him. I mean, it's just mind blowing. It's not even it's not even something like Bukele in El Salvador mandating it. It's in a way that the populace voting for it. Now, I also should temper expectations there. I'm not claiming that people are voting for him because Argentina is now vast majority pro-Bitcoin. That's not what I'm saying. There are many other policies which are quite controversial, as you can read from these headlines here, of his policies and his worldview and his beliefs. I'm not going to pretend like I know all of his policies, like I know all the intricacies of the culture and politics of Argentina. So I am very confident that Bitcoin is not the statement, the campaign statements he's made with Bitcoin, I'm sure are not the primary reason of why people elect him. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that this shifts the Overton window, and I do think we're going to see, if he is elected, many more South American governments and politicians start to become more open to Bitcoin, at least less resistant to Bitcoin like they've been in the past. And let's say Latin America, if El Salvador continues to be this shining city, they've gone with all the changes that have happened there, I think it's probable that in the next 5 years, other countries will follow suit. Not because they like Bitcoin, not even because they care about Bitcoin, but because it's what more and more people are going to vote for, both vote with their dollar and where they put their savings outside of their nation's currency, but also where they put their vote for their politicians. And likewise, if Argentina were to do this, I think Brazil could be very interesting. Brazil has been open to Bitcoin before, and obviously Brazil is the behemoth of South America in terms of population, in terms of number of large cities, in terms of its economy, and in terms of its GDP here. You know, if we're going to compare, just for the sake of comparison, so we understand what we're really talking about here, if we look at El Salvador has a gross domestic product of just under $29 billion. So not very much on the world stage. If we go to Argentina, this is a significantly larger country. We're not talking about $30 billion. We're talking about almost $500 billion here. So it's substantially larger of a nation, substantially larger as a population. Mexico also has been open to Bitcoin in a similar way to Brazil. They've expressed interest, but not much has occurred, not much has passed. And Mexico's 1.3 trillion gross domestic product here. And Brazil also has a 1.6 trillion gross domestic product. So all of a sudden, overnight, the point of why this is a big deal is that it's just going to cause the Overton window to shift to where all of a sudden we're skyrocketing to significantly larger countries. Now, my hunch is that this is going to take a very long time. Like, you should be prepared for nothing to happen for 10 years. Kind of long time. You know, my base case is assuming it's not going to happen for a long time. However, this was a surprise at how quick it has happened. In the same way, for me, El Salvador was a surprise. In the same way, all these ETFs being filed this summer is a surprise. I'm continually being surprised at how quickly these things are moving, despite my more pessimistic assumptions. And so I am excited and slightly worried that if I'm wrong about Bitcoin's timeline, I might be thinking it's too long. So, you know, if my hunch is 20 years, maybe we're actually looking at 15. If my hunch is 30 years, maybe we're looking at 20. You know, I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know. Nobody should trade this based on this news. Okay, that's one more thing I want to say in my parting message here, is that you should not trade Bitcoin on the result of these news events. Okay, let's take a look at what's happened to Bitcoin's price. In Argentina, this is Bitcoin's price, official price over the last day here. Bitcoin has risen 22%. In the last day, we have a dramatic spike here, not very long ago, where Bitcoin was virtually flat before, and now we have that out. Let's zoom out a little bit to get a better sense. This is the last 5 days for Bitcoin's price. This is the last month. This is the last 6 months. This is year to date. 1 year. I mean, this chart alone should tell you why you should not trade this thing, okay? Back here in November of last year, it was roughly 80% lower than it is today. And I know a lot of people, I got a lot of messages. I knew a lot of people, both anecdotally and just following on Twitter, people that were selling here, trying to buy in lower because sentiment is down a lot. People were very scared. And that would have been precisely the wrong thing to do. And so my encouragement, I mean, just yesterday, I get more messages all the time. Like, should I trade this thing? Should I wait for it to go lower? My friends, if this is an exponential curve upwards, and the probability that you're going to be able to time a global asset like this correctly is just incredibly difficult. It's just so hard, because literally overnight, any one event in the world could lean towards Bitcoin in a major way, just like this election, was not expected. And so in the same way, we don't know what to predict. And if you're going to think you're smart enough to predict, I wish you the best of luck, but I don't think it's a good idea. So what we're seeing here in Argentina, I think we're going to see in many other countries in the coming year, 10 years, 20 years, where things just stay flat and then suddenly they spike upwards. And again, this is not a major spike. This is not a major spike. This is the primaries of him. And probably even if he were to get in power, we don't know what would happen. So eventually major things are going to happen that will be much more significant spikes with this. You got to prepare, if we are correct in this Bitcoin thesis, that someday it may just double and then double again in the next week and then double again. There is no telling of what's going to occur. And one other thing I should mention here is that this chart we've been looking at, that I've been talking about, of a 10 million Bitcoin, that is false. That this is the accurate, or this is the inaccurate price for Bitcoin. The market exchange rate is actually significantly higher. These are just the fudged numbers that the government predicts. I've talked to people from Argentina in the last couple of days here, and most of them are saying it's roughly 3x. It's roughly 3 times what the official rate is. So Bitcoin could already be 30 million easily, depending on who you ask, what market you're talking about there, as the government at least. So anyway, on one hand, this doesn't change much. On the other hand, I think as far as the Overton window goes, and as far as global perspective goes, I think it's a big deal. And so I think if you're ignoring this thing, I think it's going to be an increasingly costly mistake. And as I've said before, people are afraid, oh, what if the government bans it? And I've told people, it's like, no, the government will adopt it. The government will ignore it until they'll adopt it. In the same way of horses versus locomotives. If you have a military that runs on horses, runs on horseback, you have a cavalry, and this locomotive thing comes along, the government can ignore it. Oh, whatever, we don't care. Until suddenly a competing nation is phasing out the horses and creating a national railway system. All of a sudden, you as a nation, in interest of your own self-preservation and in interest of national security, you are incentivized to upgrade to the railroad as fast as possible. It's not a matter of the locomotive lobbyists getting bigger and influencing the government to their will. It's just a matter of incentive structures. Bitcoin does not require people like me to go out there and talk about it. It does not require lobbyists out there to bribe politicians to adopt it and abandon central banks in fiat ways. It's simply incentive structures. You don't need the money. You don't need the capital. You don't need the political influence. You don't need the media headway to make progress. All you need is the incentive structure. And before we know it, in South America, we're probably going to see more countries follow suit. First, they'll stop being negative against Bitcoin. Second, they will become positive Bitcoin in word. Then they'll become positive Bitcoin in deed. And we could very well see a sort of a currency arms race here in South America over the rest of the decade here, which to me is very exciting. I'm excited, obviously, because for Bitcoin, that means price go up in terms of political currency units. But also, to me, that's exciting for the people there. Bitcoin adoption is fastest in the world in Northwest Africa, South America, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. It's coming along in America, Australia, and Europe as well, and Asia. But those are the places it's happening the fastest. And I think this election is just another one of those tiny little data points in this very long trend that seems to be accelerating. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens from here.